My brother laughed in my face when he told me I'd miss the family reunion. They secretly held it a day early just to avoid my stress. They thought I was powerless, but they forgot one crucial detail. I legally own the lake house they plan to use for Christmas. This is where the story truly begins, and trust me, the payback is worth every second of the wait. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the fallout. We're curious. Have you ever been the black sheep of your family? Let us know in the comments. The exhaustion I felt wasn't just in my bones, it was in the marrow. It was the kind of fatigue that makes your eyes burn and your hands tremble slightly when you try to hold a glass of water. I had just come from a 10-hour shift at the firm, followed immediately by a 45-minute detour to the pharmacy to pick up my father's heart medication, because my mother, Margaret, had forgotten to call it in for the third time this month. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror of my parents' house before stepping into the living room. I looked pale. The dark circles under my eyes were fighting a losing war against my concealer, but I forced a smile. I had to. It was the preliminary holiday mixer, the casual drinks and appetizers night that always preceded the official family reunion, which was scheduled for tomorrow, Saturday. I walked into the living room, balancing my purse, the pharmacy bag, and a tray of high-end pastries I'd picked up from the bakery Anthony liked. The room was warm, smelling of cinnamon and expensive cologne. My brother, Anthony, was lounging on the leather recliner, a glass of scotch in one hand. My scotch, I noted, the one I'd bought for Dad's birthday, and holding court with Aunt Linda and a few cousins. "Claire, you made it," Aunt Linda chirped, though she didn't move from her spot on the sofa to greet me. "We were just saying how busy you always are." "Someone has to be," I said, trying to keep the tone light as I set the medication on the mantelpiece and the pastries on the coffee table. I took a breath, trying to absorb the festive atmosphere. "I'm just glad I finished the audit in time. I can't wait for the reunion tomorrow. I actually took the whole day off so I can help set up early." The room went quiet. It wasn't a natural lull in conversation. It was a sharp, sudden silence, like a needle scratching across a record. Anthony looked at me over the rim of his glass. A slow, lazy smile spread across his face. He didn't look concerned, he looked amused. He took a sip of the scotch, savoring it before he chuckled, a wet, dismissive sound. "What?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock confusion. "The reunion," I said, faltering slightly. I looked from Anthony to Margaret, who was suddenly very interested in a loose thread on her sweater. "Tomorrow, Saturday, the barbecue and the group photos." Anthony set his glass down, the ice clinking loudly in the silence. "Claire, babe," he said, shaking his head, "that happened yesterday." I froze. My brain tried to process the sentence, but it didn't fit the reality I knew. "What do you mean? Today is Friday. The invitation said Saturday." "Yeah, we changed it," Anthony shrugged, leaning back and crossing his legs. "Mom, didn't you tell her?" Margaret looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and defensive irritation. "Oh, Claire, honestly, it was a last-minute decision. The weather looked better yesterday, and honestly, everyone was already in town, so we just did it." "You just did it," I repeated, my voice sounded hollow. "Without me." "Well, you're always working," Anthony interjected, grabbing a pastry from the box I just brought. "And when you're not working, you're stressing about schedules and timelines. We just wanted a chill vibe, you know? No clipboards, no itineraries, just family." "I don't bring clipboards to parties, Anthony," I whispered, the sting of humiliation beginning to rise in my throat. "Oh, don't be dramatic," Aunt Linda chimed in, pulling out her phone. "It was lovely. Look, we got the most beautiful group shot by the fountain." She thrust her phone into my face. The screen was bright, assaulting my tired eyes. There they were. My parents, Aunt Linda, the cousins, and right in the center, Anthony, with his arm draped around our mother, beaming like the golden child he was. Everyone was wearing color-coordinated blue sweaters. "You even coordinated outfits," I said, staring at the photo. "You planned this. This wasn't last minute." "It was just a casual thing," Margaret snapped, finally standing up. Stop making a scene, Claire. This is exactly why we didn't call you. You make everything so heavy. I looked around the room. My family. The people whose bills I managed, whose medical appointments I scheduled, whose lives I subsidized with my time and money. They were all looking at me with varying degrees of pity and annoyance. I was the outsider. I was the utility bill they D to pay, not a person they wanted to celebrate with. Anthony took a bite of the pastry, my contribution, and spoke with his mouth full. Guess I forgot to tell you. Haha, my bad. He didn't look sorry, he looked triumphant. I stood there for a moment, the heat rising in my cheeks, feeling the utter foolishness of my own existence. I had rushed here. I had worried about the medication. I had bought the pastries. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table. A cold, heavy stone settled in the pit of my stomach, replacing the anxiety. Okay, I said softly. Okay, Anthony mocked. That's it. That's it, I said. I turned around, leaving the medication on the mantel and the pastries on the table. I walked out the door into the biting winter air, and as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, I realized that the cold outside was nothing compared to the freeze that had just taken over my heart. But as I walked to my car, clutching my keys, a thought occurred to me. A dark, jagged realization that cut through the sorrow. They had enjoyed their little secret party, but they had forgotten who held the keys to the rest of their winter. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of red taillights and blurred vision. I had to pull over twice. Once because I was hyperventilating so hard my fingers went numb, and once because the tears were coming so fast I couldn't see the road. I sat in my car on the shoulder of the highway, the hazard lights clicking a rhythmic beat that matched the pounding in my temples. You make everything so heavy. My mother's voice echoed in the small cabin of the sedan. Was that true? Was I heavy? Or was I just the only one carrying the weight? I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the weekends I spent organizing their taxes because Anthony didn't understand deductions. I thought about the time I canceled my own birthday trip to Cabo because Dad had a minor surgery and Mom was too anxious to drive him to the hospital herself. I thought about the text message I had sent Anthony just 3 days ago, reminding him to buy a gift for Mom, which he had clearly ignored. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from Aunt Linda. Claire, don't be sulky. It's unappealing. Come back inside and have a drink. Anthony didn't mean it maliciously, that's just his sense of humor. I stared at the screen, his sense of humor, cruelty wrapped in a laugh track. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't reply. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth or typed a word, I would vomit everything I had held back for a decade, and they would just call me hysterical again. They would weaponize my pain to prove their point. See? Claire is unstable. Good thing we didn't invite her. I finally made it to my apartment, a quiet, pristine sanctuary that I had bought with my own money, free of family drama. I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the sofa, not bothering to turn on the lights. The silence of the apartment usually brought me peace, but tonight it felt like a tomb. I closed my eyes and the image of the photo Aunt Linda showed me burned behind my eyelids. The matching blue sweaters. They must have bought them weeks ago. They had a group chat without me. They had planned the logistics without me. They don't want me, I whispered to the empty room. They just want what I do for them. I lay there for an hour, spiraling into self-pity, until my gaze landed on the calendar hanging in my kitchen. December 23rd was circled in red, Lake House opening. My breath hitched. The lake house. It was the crown jewel of our family traditions. A sprawling, timber-framed lodge on the edge of Lake Arrowhead. Every year, for as long as I could remember, the entire extended family went up there for the week of Christmas. It was where we opened gifts. It was where Margaret baked her famous pies. It was where Anthony planned to propose to his new girlfriend this year. He had been bragging about the romantic scenery for months. They were all packing for it right now. They assumed that on Monday, they would drive up the winding mountain roads, punch in the gate code, and walk into a warm, stocked house. They assumed I had already called the cleaners. They assumed I had already paid the utility bill for the winter heating. They assumed I had already arranged for the snow removal service to clear the quarter-mile driveway. They assumed these things happened by magic. I sat up slowly, the tears drying on my cheeks, replaced by a strange, electric clarity. I walked over to my desk and unlocked the top drawer. Inside sat a thick leather folder, the deed. 3 years ago, my parents had run into significant financial trouble due to a series of bad investments Anthony had convinced them to make. To save the lake house from being seized by creditors, they had transferred the title to me. I had paid off the outstanding liens with my savings, refinanced the mortgage in my name, and taken over all in tenants' costs. "It's just a formality, Claire," Dad had said at the time. "It's still the family house. You're just the keeper." I was the keeper, the caretaker, the servant. But legally, I was the owner. I pulled the deed out and laid it on the desk. My name, Claire Bennett, was the only one on the paper. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Margaret. "We're heading to bed. We expect you at brunch tomorrow to discuss the food list for the lake trip. Don't be late." No apology, just a demand, just a summon to perform my duty. I looked at the deed, then at the text message. A cold, calm smile touched my lips for the first time that night. They thought they had crushed me by excluding me from a party. They didn't realize that by cutting me out, they had severed the only lifeline keeping their holiday plans afloat. To understand why this betrayal broke me, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Bennett family. It wasn't just that they favored Anthony. It was that they consumed me to feed him. I am 34 years old. I am a senior estate manager for ultra-high net worth clients. My entire career is built on anticipating problems, managing complex assets, and cleaning up messes. I am good at it. I am very, very good at it. And for the last decade, I had applied those professional skills to my family for free. When Dad needed a hip replacement, I researched the surgeons, fought the insurance company for 3 weeks to get the out-of-network specialist covered, and set up the recovery room in the den. Anthony visited once, brought a get-well-soon balloon, and ate half the casserole I had meal prepped for Mom. Mom called him so thoughtful for bringing the balloon. She asked me why I hadn't dusted the ceiling fan. When Anthony got a DUI 4 years ago, I was the one who found the lawyer. I was the one who loaned him $5,000 for the retainer, money I never saw again. I was the one who drove him to his community service hours on Saturday mornings so he wouldn't violate probation. Anthony is 36. He is charming, handsome in a jagged, boyish way, and utterly useless. He calls himself an idea man. He started 5 businesses in 6 years, all of which failed, and all of which were funded by loans from our parents that decimated their retirement savings. He is the antagonist of my life, not because he is evil in a cinematic way, but because he is a parasitic drain who believes he is the sun. The morning after the secret reunion, I didn't go to brunch. Instead, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee and analyzed the situation like it was a client file. I thought about the conversation at the party, Anthony's laugh. "Guess I forgot to tell you." It wasn't just a snub, it was a power play. Anthony had been feeling threatened lately. I had recently refused to co-sign a loan for his latest venture, a luxury crypto consulting firm, and he had been poisoning the well with Mom and Dad ever since. "Claire thinks she's better than us," I had heard him whisper to Aunt Linda at Thanksgiving. "She waves her money around to control everyone." The irony was suffocating. I didn't use money to control them, I used it to save them. But Anthony, the master manipulator, had flipped the script. He had convinced them that my competence was arrogance and that his incompetence was just free-spirited charm. I pulled up the bank records for the Bennett Family Trust, a checking account I managed. I put $2,000 a month into that account to cover my parents' supplemental costs. I paid the property taxes on their primary residence. I paid the insurance on Anthony's car because He was between checks, and Mom cried if I didn't do it. And then there was the lake house account. I opened the spreadsheet for the upcoming Christmas trip. The logistics were staggering. Catered Christmas Eve dinner for 15 people, $3,200, deposit paid by me. Professional cleaning crew, pre-arrival, $600. Snowplow service contract, $400. Firewood delivery, $250. Stocked fridge and pantry, delivery scheduled for Monday, $1,500. I looked at the total. Nearly $6,000 of my own money was allocated to give them a magical week in a house I owned, to celebrate a family that had taken photos in matching sweaters without me. My phone rang. It was Anthony. I stared at the screen, watching his name flash. I could picture him perfectly, probably just waking up, hungover, needing to ask me if I had remembered to buy the specific brand of champagne his girlfriend liked for the trip. I answered. "Hello." "Claire," his voice was scratchy. "Where are you? Mom's freaking out. You were supposed to be here an hour ago with the grocery list." "I'm not coming, Anthony." "What? Don't be a brat," he sighed, the condescension thick enough to choke on. "Look, if this is about yesterday, get over it. We just wanted one day without you micromanaging the fun. You're coming to the lake on Monday, aren't you? W. E need you to drive the van with the extra luggage." The van, of course. Anthony and his girlfriend would take his convertible. Mom and Dad would take their sedan. I was designated to drive the cargo van with the gifts and luggage. I was the logistics department. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I was just looking at the lake house logistics." "Yeah, whatever, just make sure the hot tub is hot when we get there. 'Kay, I gotta go, my head is killing me." He hung up. He hung up on me. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He just issued orders for the hot tub. That was the moment the sadness finally evaporated, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. He wanted a life without my micromanaging. He wanted a holiday without my clipboards. I looked at the deed on my desk. I looked at the phone numbers for the caterer, the plow guy, and the utility company. "Okay, Anthony," I said to the silence. "Let's see how much fun you have when the manager quits." The decision didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with the quiet click of a mouse button as I opened the Bennett Family Holiday spreadsheet. I sat at my mahogany desk in my home office, the morning light filtering through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was Saturday morning, the day of the official reunion I was supposed to be excited about. The reunion they had already held without me. I looked at the rows and columns of my spreadsheet. It was a masterpiece of logistical planning. Every dietary restriction, every arrival time, every linen count was accounted for. It was the blueprint for a perfect family memory. And I was going to dismantle it, brick by brick. I picked up my phone. My hand hovered over the contact for Mrs. Higgins' catering. Mrs. Higgins had catered our Christmas Eve dinner for 6 years. She made a beef Wellington that Anthony claimed was the only reason he endured the holidays. I dialed. "Hello, Higgins Catering, this is Sarah speaking." "Hi, Sarah, it's Claire Bennett." "Oh, Ms. Bennett, how are you, dear? We're all prepped for Monday's delivery. I've got the extra horseradish sauce your brother likes." I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling a phantom pang of guilt. It wasn't Sarah's fault, but this was war, and collateral damage was inevitable. "Actually, Sarah, that's why I'm calling. I need to cancel the order." There was a long pause on the other end. "Cancel? The entire order? Ms. Bennett, the delivery is in 48 hours. We've already purchased the tenderloins." "I understand," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I am fully aware of the contract terms. You can keep the 50% deposit. In fact, charge the remaining balance to the card on file if you need to cover the food costs. I don't want you to lose money, but do not deliver the food to the lake house. Donate it to a shelter, eat it yourselves, throw it away. Just do not deliver it." Is everything all right?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Did something happen to your parents? No, I said, staring at the photo of my family on my desk, one from 3 years ago where I was actually in the frame. I reached out and placed the phone face down on the wood so I wouldn't have to look at it. Everyone is fine. Plans have just changed. We won't be needing the service this year. Okay, well, if you're sure, I'll process the cancellation. Thank you, Sarah. I hung up. Strike one. Next was the snow removal service. Mr. Henderson. He was a gruff older man who plowed the steep, quarter-mile driveway that led from the main road down to the lakefront property. Without him, that driveway was a death trap of ice and 2 feet of accumulated powder. Henderson here. Mr. Henderson, it's Claire Bennett. I'm calling to suspend service for the upcoming week. Suspend, he grunted. Ms. Bennett, forecast says a storm is rollin' in Sunday night. You're gonna have 3 feet of drift by Monday morning. If I don't plow, ain't nobody getting up or down that hill. I know, I said. That's fine. No one will be at the house this week. Suit yourself, but if you call me Monday beggin' for a dig-out, it's triple rate. I won't be calling, I assured him. Strike two. I spent the next hour systematically, effectively erasing the holiday. I canceled the cleaning crew who were supposed to turn on the heat and dust the rooms today. I canceled the grocery delivery of wine, cheese, and breakfast staples. I canceled the firewood drop-off. By noon, I had saved myself nearly $4,000 in final payments, though I had lost about $2,000 in deposits. It was a small price to pay for the message I was about to send. But the final step was the most important. I opened the smart home app on my phone. The lake house was old, but I had modernized it 2 years ago with a high-end security system, smart thermostats, and most crucially, smart locks. I could control every access point from my phone in the city. I tapped on the user's tab. There they were. Admin, Claire. Guest, Mom and Dad, code 1980. Guest, Anthony, code 5555. Service, Cleaner, code 1234. My thumb hovered over Anthony's name. I remembered the smirk on his face yesterday. Guess I forgot to tell you. I tapped Delete User. Are you sure you want to revoke access for Anthony? Yes. I did the same for Mom and Dad. Then I went to the master settings. I changed the master code to a random 6-digit string that only I knew. Finally, I opened the thermostat controls. The house was currently set to Eco Mode, 50 degrees, to prevent pipes from freezing, scheduled to ramp up to a cozy 72 degrees on Sunday night in preparation for their arrival. I disabled the schedule. I locked the thermostat at 45 degrees, cold enough to be miserable, just warm enough to keep the pipes from bursting. I wasn't going to destroy my asset just to spite them. I sat back in my chair. The house was now a fortress. A cold, empty, unserviced fortress. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Anthony. Yo, don't forget to send the gate code to Jessica. She's driving up separate on Tuesday. I stared at the message. The audacity was breathtaking. He had humiliated me 24 hours ago, and now he was treating me like his personal secretary again. I didn't reply. I simply turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I had originally bought for Christmas Eve. Let them drive. Let them pack their bags. Let them dream of the hot tub and the roaring fire. The investigation phase was over. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the snap. Monday arrived with a gray, ominous sky that promised heavy snow. I went to work as usual. I sat in my glass-walled office, reviewing trust documents for a client, but my focus was entirely on the second monitor, where I had the lake house security feed open in a small window. The camera at the main gate showed a pristine, untouched layer of white snow. The driveway beyond it was a smooth, treacherous ribbon of ice. At 2:45 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the frame. It was Anthony's Range Rover, leased, of course, with Dad as the co-signer. Behind him was my parents' sedan. They had arrived. I watched in silence as Anthony rolled down his window. He reached out to the keypad mounted on the stone pillar. I could see his breath puffing in the freezing air. He punched in the code, 5555. Nothing happened. The heavy iron gates remained shut. He punched it again, harder this time. Nothing. He opened his door and stepped out into the snow. He was wearing a light designer jacket, clearly expecting to be inside a warm house within minutes. He kicked the gate. He shouted something back at the car. Then my phone rang. Incoming call, Anthony. I took a deep breath. This was it. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello, I answered, my voice professional and detached. Claire, Anthony screamed. The sound of the wind was whipping against his phone microphone. What is wrong with the gate? I've typed the code in 10 times. It's not working. I know, I said calmly. I changed it. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the static of the wind. You what? I changed the code, Anthony, and I deleted yours. Is this a joke? He laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Okay, very funny. You got me back for the party thing. Haha, good one. Now give me the new code. Jessica is freezing and Mom needs to use the bathroom. No, I said. What do you mean, no? His voice dropped an octave, entering that dangerous territory where his charm evaporated and his temper flared. Claire, stop playing games. Open the damn gate. It's not a game, I replied, leaning back in my office chair and swiveling slightly to look out at the city skyline. You guys wanted a holiday without my stress. You wanted a chill vibe without my clipboards and my schedules. So, I'm giving it to you. I have removed myself entirely from the equation. That includes my house. Your house, Anthony sputtered. It's our house, it's the family house. Actually, I corrected him, it's my house. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. My name is on the insurance. You are guests, and guests can be uninvited. Put Mom on, he demanded. I'm putting you on speaker. I heard a rustling sound, and then my mother's voice, shrill and panicked. Claire, what is going on? Anthony says the gate is broken. It's not broken, Mom. I locked it. Why would you do that? She cried. We've been driving for 4 hours. It's snowing. Dad's hip is hurting him from sitting so long. Open the gate this instant. I can't do that, Mom, I said. Remember Friday? You said I make everything heavy. You said you enjoyed the reunion so much more because I wasn't there to ruin the mood. I realized you were right. You're happier without me. So, I'm letting yo. You be happy. Go have your holiday somewhere else. You are being spiteful, Margaret shrieked. This is about a party. You're going to ruin Christmas over a party. It wasn't just a party, Mom, I said, my voice hardening. It was you and Dad and Anthony deciding that I am nothing more than a servant to you. You use me to fix everything, pay for everything, and organize everything, and then you laugh about excluding me. Well, the servant has quit. Claire, listen to me. Anthony's voice came back on the line. He sounded desperate now. We can talk about this later. Seriously, we can sit down and apologize or whatever you want. But right now, you need to open this gate. We have all the food in the car, we have the gifts. Oh, you have food? I asked. Good, because I canceled the caterer. You what? And the grocery delivery, and the firewood, and the snow plow. On the security monitor, I saw Anthony kick the tire of his Range Rover. He looked small and ridiculous against the backdrop of the massive, unyielding gate. You're insane, he spat. You're actually psychotic. Maybe, I said, or maybe I'm just done. The gate stays closed, Anthony. Turn around. I'm not turning around, he yelled. I'm going to break this lock off. I'm going to drive through it if I have to. I wouldn't do that, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I have the police on speed dial, and since I am the legal owner of the property, I will have you arrested for trespassing and destruction of property. And considering you're currently on probation for that DUI, I don't think your Poe would be very happy about a new charge, would he? The silence on the other end was absolute. I had played the ace. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up. I looked at the monitor. Anthony was staring at his phone, his face a mask of shock. He walked over to Mom's car and leaned in the window. I saw Margaret throw her hands up in the air. They were stuck, and the snow was starting to fall harder. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Aunt Linda. She hadn't been in the convoy. She was driving up separately later that evening. But clearly, the alarm had been sounded. Claire Bennett, she barked the moment I answered. What on earth do you think you are doing? Your mother is hysterical. She just called me crying. She says you've locked them out in a blizzard. It's hardly a blizzard, Aunt Linda. It's a flurry, I said, eyeing the weather report. And yes, they are locked out. Have you lost your mind? Linda demanded. This is family. You don't treat family like this. Look, I know you were hurt about the photos. Hurt? I cut her off. Linda, you showed me those photos like they were a trophy. You rubbed my face in the fact that you all prefer my absence. You can't have it both ways. You can't treat me like an outcast and then demand access to my assets. It's not your asset, it's your father's house. Legally, it's not, I said. And do you know why it's not? Because Anthony convinced Dad to invest in that exclusive solar panel startup 3 years ago, the one that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. Dad was going to lose the house to bankruptcy court until I stepped in, bought the debt, and put the deed in my name. I saved this house. I pay the taxes. I pay the upkeep. It is mine. That was a misunderstanding, Linda stammered. Anthony didn't know. Anthony knew, I said firmly. Just like he knows he doesn't have the money to pay for this vacation himself. What are you talking about? Anthony is doing very well. He told us his new crypto firm is taking off. I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. Linda, Anthony has been borrowing money from me for 6 months to pay his rent. He put the deposit for his girlfriend's engagement ring on my credit card because his was declined. I canceled that card this morning, by the way. I hope he hasn't proposed yet. I don't believe you, Linda said, her voice wavering. You don't have to, I said. But ask yourself this. If he's doing so well, why is he currently standing outside my gate, freezing, instead of just taking everyone to a luxury resort? I checked the monitor again. The situation at the gate was deteriorating. Anthony was pacing back and forth. His girlfriend, Jessica, a sweet girl who I actually liked, sadly, had gotten out of the car and was hugging herself against the cold. I saw Anthony gesture wildly towards the keypad. Then, he went to the trunk of his car and pulled out a tire iron. He's going to break it, I whispered to myself. I didn't hesitate. I dialed the local sheriff's department in Lake Arrowhead. I knew the sheriff, Jim, because I had coordinated the donation for the annual policeman's ball last year. Sheriff's office. Hi, this is Claire Bennett. I'm the owner of the property on No. RTH Shore Drive. Oh, hi, Ms. Bennett. Everything okay? Not really, Jim. I have some estranged family members attempting to break into my property. I can see them on the camera. One of them has a tire iron and is threatening to smash the gate mechanism. I need a patrol car dispatched. Estranged family? Jim asked, sounding surprised. You mean trespassers? I mean I have revoked their permission to be there, and they are refusing to leave. I am worried about property damage. All right, I've got a unit 5 minutes out. We'll send them over to de-escalate. Thank you, Jim. I watched the screen. Anthony was approaching the keypad with the tire iron raised. Don't do it, Anthony, I murmured. Just as he swung, Margaret jumped out of the sedan and grabbed his arm. She was pointing down the road. Blue and red lights reflected off the snow. The police cruiser pulled up behind my parents' car. 2 officers stepped out. I watched the silent pantomime on the screen. Anthony dropped the tire iron into the snow. The officers approached him. There was a lot of pointing. Anthony was waving his arms, looking agitated. The officers remained calm, hands resting on their belts. One of them walked over to the keypad, checked it, then shook his head at Anthony. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Police, really?" I typed back. "You were trespassing, go home." On the screen, the officer was handing Anthony a citation, likely for the attempted damage or just a warning to vacate. Anthony looked defeated. He slumped against the side of his Range Rover. He said something to the officer, then pointed at his girlfriend. The officer shook his head again. Anthony got back into his car. He slammed the door so hard I could almost feel the vibration through the internet connection. Slowly, painfully, the cars began to reverse. The driveway was narrow, and they had to back up the entire quarter-mile to the main road. It was a humiliating, slow procession of tail lights fading into the gray afternoon. I watched them go. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a mixture of adrenaline and grief. I had done it. I had actually done it. But the war wasn't over. They weren't going home. I knew my family. They wouldn't accept defeat that easily. They would go to the nearest hotel, regroup, and try to find a way to spin this to the rest of the family. They would try to paint me as the villain. But they had forgotten one thing. I still had the family emergency fund. And I still had the emails Anthony had sent me begging for money, promising me returns on investments that didn't exist. If they wanted to make this a public fight, I was ready to bring the receipts. My phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello. Ms. Bennett, this is the front desk manager at the Lake Arrowhead Lodge." "Yes." "We have a Mr. Anthony Bennett here. He's trying to check in 3 rooms for a week, and he's attempting to use a credit card with your name on it. The card has been declined." I smiled. The escalation had just begun. "I did not authorize any charges," I said pleasantly, "and I would advise you not to take a check from him either." The drive up the mountain was treacherous, but my hands were steady on the wheel. The snow had turned into a legitimate storm, blanketing the pines in white and turning the winding roads into a test of nerve. I wasn't driving to the lake house, though. I was driving to the Lake Arrowhead Lodge. After I had blocked the charges, the hotel manager had called me back, frantic. Anthony was causing a scene in the lobby, screaming about theft and fraud, claiming I had stolen his identity. He was trying to rally the extended family, Aunt Linda, my cousins, and even my Uncle Bob, who had driven up from San Diego against me. They were all gathered there, stranded, waiting for the confusion to be sorted out so they could go to my house. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative from a hotel lobby. I was going to end this, in person, in front of everyone. I walked into the lodge around 6:00 p.m. The lobby was rustic and grand, with a massive stone fireplace roaring in the center, and there they were. My entire family, about 15 people, occupied a cluster of leather sofas near the bar. Anthony was standing in the center, a drink in his hand, his face flushed. He was mid-sentence, gesturing wildly to Aunt Linda and my parents. "She's clearly having a mental break, Mom. That's what I'm trying to tell you. She locked us out, she cut off the cards. It's a power trip because she's jealous of the family dynamic. She's trying to punish us for being happy." "Is that right?" I asked, my voice cutting through the hum of the lobby. The group went silent. Anthony spun around. His eyes widened, first in shock, then in a flicker of fear that he quickly masked with aggression. "Oh, look who decided to show up," Anthony shouted, throwing his arms wide. "The Ice Queen herself, did you come too? Unlock the gate, or are you just here to watch us freeze?" My father stood up slowly. He looked tired, his face gray with stress. "Claire, honey, what is going on? Anthony says you stole the deed to the house. He says you hacked his accounts." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked calmly toward the coffee table in the center of their circle. I was carrying my heavy leather work satchel. I set it down on the table with a heavy thud. "I didn't steal anything, Dad," I said, unbuckling the straps. And I think it's time we stopped pretending that I'm the problem in this family. Don't listen to her, Anthony snapped, stepping forward to block me. She's lying, she's trying to manipulate you. Sit down, Anthony, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the steel edge I used in boardrooms when I was firing someone for cause. He hesitated. I said sit down. He sank onto the arm of the sofa, looking at Jessica, his girlfriend, who was watching me with wide, confused eyes. I opened the bag. I pulled out 3 color-coded binders. For 10 years, I began, looking at my mother, I have managed this family's life. I have paid the bills, fixed the mistakes, and covered the tracks. I did it because I thought that's what family did. I thought we were a team. I picked up the first binder. It was blue. But then, I continued, I found out that while I was working late to pay for your heart medication, Dad, you were all having a party without me. Laughing about how stressful I am. Joking that you forgot to invite me. It was just a joke, Claire. Aunt Linda interjected nervously. You're taking it too seriously. Am I? I opened the blue binder. This is a record of every financial transaction I have made for this family in the last 5 years. I handed a stack of papers to my father. Dad, look at page 4. Do you see the entry for Solar Ventures LLC? My father squinted at the paper. The solar panel company, the one that went bust. The one Anthony convinced you to invest $200,000 in, I corrected. The investment that nearly cost you your home. The investment I had to bail you out of by buying the lake house debt. Yeah, it was a bad market, Anthony muttered, looking at the floor. Startups fail, it happens. It wasn't a startup, Anthony, I said, pulling out a bank transfer record. It was a shell company. The room went dead silent. What? My mother whispered. I did a forensic audit on the company before I paid off Dad's debt, I explained, my eyes locked on my brother. I didn't tell you at the time because I didn't want to break your heart, but the money didn't go to solar panels. It went to a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account registered to Anthony Bennett. My father's hand started to shake. The paper rattled loudly. Anthony, is this true? She's lying, Anthony yelled, standing up again. These are fake, she forged them. These are bank-certified records, Dad, I said calmly. Anthony stole your retirement, he stole your equity, and he used it to buy that sports car he crashed 2 years ago. I turned to Jessica. She was pale, clutching her purse. Jessica, I said softly, I like you, you seem smart. Anthony told you he bought your engagement ring, right? A 3-carat diamond. Jessica nodded, her hand instinctively going to her empty ring finger. He said it was being resized. It's not being resized, I said, pulling a credit card statement from the binder. It was declined. He tried to put a $25,000 charge on my American Express card yesterday morning, the one I canceled. He doesn't have the money, Jessica. He never has. Jessica turned to Anthony. Her expression wasn't angry yet, it was horrified. Anthony, you told me your crypto firm just closed $1 million deal. It did, Anthony stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. The funds are just there in escrow. Claire is just trying to ruin us. She's jealous of you, Jess. She's jealous because she's alone and miserable. I'm not the one trying to check into a hotel with a stolen credit card, I countered. I turned back to my parents. They looked broken. My mother was weeping silently into a napkin. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. You called me heavy, I said to my mother. You said I ruined the mood. You were right. Dealing with reality is heavy. Paying for your mistakes is heavy. Cleaning up Anthony's crimes is heavy, and I am done carrying it. Claire, my mother sobbed, reaching out a hand. We didn't know about the money. You didn't want to know, I said, stepping back. You preferred the lie. You preferred the charming son who smiled and lied to you over the daughter who worked herself to death to save you. You chose him over and over again, even yesterday. We can fix this, Dad whispered. Claire, please, we can fix this. No, Dad, I said, closing the satchel. You can't fix this, because I'm not fixing it for you anymore. I looked at the group of extended family, cousins and aunts who had been staring with their mouths open. The lake house is mine, I announced clearly. The locks are changed. The police are patrolling the perimeter. If anyone attempts to enter the property, I will press charges. Enjoy your stay at the lodge. I suggest you ask Anthony to pay the bill. Oh, wait, he can't. I turned to leave. Claire, Anthony screamed, lunging toward me. You bitch, you ruined everything. He grabbed my arm. It was a mistake. Before I could even react, two large men in dark suits, hotel security, were on him. They had been watching the escalating volume from the edges of the room. They pulled him off me and pinned his arms behind his back. Sir, you need to calm down or we will call the sheriff, the head of security barked. I adjusted my coat, smoothing out the fabric where he had grabbed me. I looked at him one last time. He looked pathetic. A 36-year-old child throwing a tantrum because his allowance had been cut off. Goodbye, Anthony, I said. I walked out of the lodge and into the cold night air. The snow was falling harder now, cleaning the world, covering the dirt. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't drive back to the city. I drove to the only place I wanted to be. The aftermath was not swift, but it was total. I spent Christmas alone at the lake house. It was the most peaceful week of my life. I sat by the fire, reading books I had been meaning to read for years, drinking wine that I had bought for myself. I watched the snow pile up against the glass walls, secure in the knowledge that the driveway was plowed because I had called Mr. Henderson back and paid him double to clear it just for me. My phone blew up for the first 48 hours, but I didn't answer. I had blocked Anthony. I had muted my parents. I needed silence. When I finally returned to the city in January, the landscape of my family had been permanently altered. The revelation about the Solar Ventures fraud had been the final straw for my father. Confronted with the undeniable proof that his golden boy had stolen his life savings, something in Dad finally broke. He didn't press criminal charges. He couldn't bring himself to send his son to prison, but he did something almost as drastic. He cut Anthony off completely. No more loans, no more car insurance payments, no more covering the rent. Without the financial IV drip from my parents and me, Anthony's life collapsed with breathtaking speed. Jessica left him 3 days after the hotel incident. She sent me a text, "Thank you for telling me before I married him," and blocked him on everything. Evicted from his luxury apartment, Anthony was forced to move into a studio in a rough part of town. He had to get a real job. The last I heard, he was working sales at a used car dealership, struggling to make commission. As for my parents, I met them for coffee in February. It was a neutral location. I didn't invite them to my apartment. They looked older, smaller. The arrogance that had fueled the secret reunion was gone, replaced by a fragile humility. "We are so sorry, Claire," my mother said, her voice trembling as she stirred her tea. "We were blind. We took you for granted because you were always strong. We just assumed you could handle it. We assumed you didn't need us the way Anthony did." "I didn't need your money," I said gently. "I needed your respect. I needed to not be the punchline of your jokes." "We know," Dad said. He reached across the table but stopped short of touching my hand, sensing the boundary I had erected. "We want to make it right. We want to pay you back for the house debt. We're selling the RV." "I don't want the money," I said, and I meant it. "I kept the house. It's a good asset, but things are going to be different now." I laid out my terms. I was no longer the executor of their estate. I hired a third-party professional to manage their finances, someone who would charge them hourly and wouldn't tolerate Anthony's interference. I would no longer manage their medical appointments, and I would not be attending any reunions for a very long time. "I love you," I told them, "but I can't be your parent anymore. I have to be your daughter, and sometimes that means I'm just a guest." They cried, they agreed. I left the coffee shop and walked out into the crisp winter sun. I took a deep breath. The air tasted different, cleaner, lighter. The wait was gone. I walked down the street, passing a travel agency window. I stopped and looked at a poster for a villa in Tuscany. Summer in Italy. I smiled, I pulled out my phone, I didn't check my family group chat, I opened my calendar. June was wide open. One ticket to Florence, please, I whispered to myself. I had spent my whole life planning everyone else's happiness. It was finally time to plan my own.